It had waited in the darkness beneath the Indian Ocean for decades, circling the tiny island like a ring of broken teeth, patient and hungry. And on the night of July 31st, 1761, when Captain Jean de Lafargue stared at his contradictory maps by candlelight, the reef began to hum. A sound too low for human ears, but felt in the bones of the ship's hull. A call, a summons. The 160 Malagasy people locked in the cargo hold felt it first. Some pressed their faces against the wet wood, listening to something ancient stirring in the deep. The children began to cry. The elders began to pray in whispered tongues to gods who had already turned their faces away. Captain Jean felt it too, though he couldn't name what crawled up his spine like cold fingers. He told himself it was just the wind, just the darkness, just his nerves about the illegal cargo sweating and dying below deck. But when he looked at the maps again, the island seemed to have moved, shifted. The ink appeared wet, running, reforming into shapes that made his eyes water. "Faster," he commanded, though every instinct screamed to stop, to turn back, to throw the maps overboard and flee. But greed is its own kind of possession, and Captain Jean was already claimed. The crew obeyed. The ship cut through black water under black sky, and with each nautical mile, the temperature dropped despite the tropical climate. Breath became visible. The wind carried sounds that weren't quite wind, whispers in a language that predated language. One sailor would later swear he heard his dead mother calling his name from beneath the waves. Then, at precisely 3:33 a.m., the reef struck. The impact didn't sound like wood meeting coral. It sounded like bones breaking, like a massive jaw snapping shut. The hull didn't just crack. It peeled open like skin, and the ocean rushed in with something resembling hunger. The ship screamed, actually screamed, a grinding wail that sailors would hear in their nightmares for years to come. The crew abandoned ship in chaos. Most made it to shore. 18 didn't. But here's what the history books won't tell you. Those 18 men didn't drown. They were pulled down by hands that had no bodies, dragged into darkness by fingers made of water and spite. Their final screams were swallowed by the depths, but their terror remained, seeping into the sand of the tiny island like blood into soil. The Malagasy in the cargo hold had no chance at all. 80 of them clawed at locked doors as water rose. Some squeezed through the hole the reef made, swimming toward moonlight that kept receding, always just out of reach. But most remained trapped as the ship sank, their hands reaching, their mouths opening in silent pleas that the ocean answered with cold indifference. Or so the survivors thought. As dawn broke and revealed the Isle of Sand for the first time, Captain Jean stood on the beach and began to laugh. Not the laugh of relief or hysteria, but something else. Something that made his crew step back, hands moving unconsciously to weapons. His laughter had a quality to it, like multiple voices layered on top of each other, some higher, some impossibly deep, none quite human. "We're home," he said, still giggling. "We're finally home." First Lieutenant Barthélemy Castellan du Vernet watched his captain's eyes and saw that the man he'd served under for years was gone. Something else looked out from behind those pupils, something that had lived in the reef and the water and the sand for a very, very long time. Something that had been waiting. The island itself was wrong. Everyone felt it immediately. Yes, it was barren, just a square kilometer of sand and scrub under a merciless sun. But that wasn't what made the survivors' skin crawl. It was the way the island watched, the way the wind changed direction to follow you as you walked, the way footprints in the sand filled in too quickly, as if something beneath was breathing, expanding, pushing up through the grains. And at night, when the temperature dropped and the stars came out wrong, too bright, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at, they heard the singing. It came from beneath the sand, dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, harmonizing in that same ancient language the wind had carried on the black water. The Malagasy recognized it. Some of the elders said it was the sound the world made before humans learned to speak. the sound of the first curse. During those first days, as the crew gathered supplies from the wreckage, they found things that shouldn't have been possible. Tools they'd never loaded, maps of the island drawn in what looked like dried blood. And in the captain's quarters, now underwater and visible through the crystal-clear shallows, a book bound in leather that wasn't leather, pages that turned themselves. Writing that appeared only when moonlight hit it at certain angles. Barthélemy took command after the captain was found one morning having carved symbols into his own chest with a piece of coral. Deep, precise cuts that should have killed him but didn't even seem to hurt. He just smiled his new smile, too wide, showing too many teeth, and said the island wanted decoration. They locked the captain in one of the structures they'd built. But they could hear him in there, talking to things that talked back in voices like scraping stone. The social divide remained even in hell. The crew controlled the water, the food, the resources. The Malagasy, now freed from their chains but not their circumstances, were given the minimum to survive. 8 of them died in the first week from dehydration, or that's what Barthélemy recorded in his log. The truth was different. Those 8 didn't die from lack of water. They died because they went looking for it in the wrong place. There was a cave on the northern edge of the island, barely visible unless you knew where to look. The sand had a tendency to shift and cover it, then reveal it again like an eyelid opening. 3 women and 5 men ventured inside, seeking shelter from the heat. Only shadows came back out, dark shapes that wore the dead like clothes, stumbling across the sand, collapsing before they reached the others. When the bodies were examined, they were completely dehydrated, yes, but there was something else. Their eyes were gone, not removed, just absent, as if they'd never had them at all. Smooth skin where sockets should be, and in their mouths, their throats, coating their lungs, sand, packed so tight it had replaced their screams. After that, no one went to the cave. But sometimes, on still nights, they heard those 8 calling their names in perfect imitation of their voices, begging to be let back in, promising water, promising rescue, promising anything if someone would just come to the cave, just for a moment, just to see. The well they dug produced water, but it tasted wrong, metallic and slightly warm even when the sun wasn't up. Some said it tasted like blood. Others said it tasted like memory, like every terrible thing they'd ever done was dissolved in the liquid, flowing down their throats, becoming part of them. But they drank. Because the alternative was the cave, or death, or worse. The raft they built should have worked. It was solid, well constructed, loaded with supplies. 16 men set out on it, waving back at the shore, faces bright with hope for the first time in months. The survivors watched them grow smaller against the horizon, watched them reach the edge where the reef circled, watched the raft stop moving, then they watched the raft tip over, slowly, deliberately, as if lifted from beneath by something massive. The men fell into the water. Some tried to swim back, but the reef had them. They thrashed, screamed, then went silent one by one. The water around them turned dark, not red like blood, black, thick, like oil, like tar, like something rotting from the inside of the world. By nightfall, the raft had washed back up on shore, intact, supplies still tied down, not a mark on it, as if the ocean was saying, "You're not leaving. The island has claimed you. You belong to the sand now." Years passed. The crew and the remaining Malagasy settled into a routine that resembled normalcy if you didn't look too close. Buildings were constructed from coral and salvaged wood. A kitchen was established. Tools were made. Life continued because life, even terrible life, has momentum, but the island took its toll. Men disappeared. Not many at a time, just one every few months. Gone in the night, leaving only footprints that led to the water's edge or into the dunes where the sand patterns looked like something large had been waiting. The survivors learned not to ask questions, not to investigate. The island fed, and if you were smart, you let it feed. The French crew eventually built another raft. 12 men departed. None returned. Then another raft. 8 men. Then another. 4 men. The island let them try, let them hope, then pulled them back down. Barthélemy, who had taken command with such determination, began to change. His hair went white in a matter of months. His hands developed tremors. He wrote letters constantly, obsessively, filling pages with pleas for rescue, but also with other things. Detailed drawings of creatures that couldn't exist. Mathematical equations that broke physics. Poems in that ancient language the sand sang at night. Some of the crew claimed they saw him standing at the water's edge during storms, arms raised, having conversations with lightning, negotiating, bargaining, offering pieces of himself in exchange for escape. When rescue ships finally came years later, they turned back. The reef wouldn't let them pass. Rowboats were smashed. Sailors were lost. The island protected its collection. The survivors could see the ships on the horizon, so close, salvation dancing just out of reach. Some threw themselves into the water in desperation, trying to swim the distance. Their bodies washed up on shore weeks later, preserved perfectly, not a mark on them, eyes wide open and staring at nothing. After each failed rescue, the singing beneath the sand grew louder. Almost celebratory, the men died off one by one. Disease, despair, or something darker. By year 5, only women remained of the Malagasy. By year 10, only 7. They survived because they learned the island's rules. Learned what to offer it, where to walk, when to close their eyes, and pretend not to see the things that moved in peripheral vision. They built a lookout tower, but not to watch for ships. Ships didn't matter anymore. They built it to watch the island itself, to track the caves opening and closing, to mark when the sand patterns indicated feeding time. To survive, they had to think like prey, silent, still, invisible. The baby born on the island in year 14 was something new. The mother had been alone for months before conception. No living man had touched her, but the baby came anyway, slipping into the world during a night when the singing was so loud it drowned out her screams. The infant didn't cry, didn't blink, just stared with eyes that were too old, too knowing, reflecting moonlight in ways human eyes don't. The other women whispered, but did not interfere. The island had given them something, a promise perhaps, or a curse. They wrapped the baby in seabird feathers they'd woven into cloth. Cloth that looked beautiful in daylight, but in darkness seemed to writhe like living things. When Captain Jacques-Marie Boudin de Tromelin finally landed on November 29, 1776, he found 7 women and 1 baby. 15 years had passed. But here's what his official report doesn't mention. The women's eyes were wrong, all of them. The pupils were too dilated, showing too much black, as if something behind them was looking out. They spoke French perfectly, but with an accent that didn't match any Malagasy dialect. An accent that predated language itself. Their clothes of woven seabird feathers moved when there was no wind, rippled like water, like breathing. The buildings they'd constructed were built in patterns that made Captain Jacques feel physically ill to look at. Arrangements that shouldn't work geometrically but did. Structures that seemed larger inside than outside. A kitchen where shadows fell at impossible angles, and food never rotted, just dried, becoming something else entirely, and the baby. God help him, the baby. When he held it, the infant's weight shifted, sometimes heavy as stone, sometimes light as air. Its skin was cold, but underneath he felt movement. Not heartbeat, something else, something that pulsed in rhythm with the waves. The women refused to speak about what happened during those 15 years. Not out of trauma, but because of agreement. They'd made a bargain, Captain Jacques realized, traded something profound for survival. They'd given the island what it wanted, and in return, the island let them leave. But they took pieces of it with them. The Isle of France welcomed them, and they integrated into society. The infant grew. The women took new names, new lives, new families. History lost track of them, not because they faded into obscurity, but because they learned to hide, learned to be human again, or at least to wear humanity like the clothes they wove from feathers. But on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the wind carries the right current, people descend from those 7 women, wake up tasting sand. They hear singing in a language that should be dead. They feel the reef calling them home, because the island never truly lets go. It's patient, it's ancient, and it remembers. The archaeologists who arrived in 2006 found evidence of the survivors' ingenuity: the copper bowls, the tools, the carefully constructed buildings, proof of human resilience in the face of impossible odds. But they also found things they couldn't explain: bones that weren't human, but weren't animal either. Geometric patterns carved into coral that predated the survivors by thousands of years. And in the cave on the northern edge, which the sand had finally revealed permanently, they found walls covered in handprints, hundreds of them, thousands, pressed into the stone when it was still soft, or made soft through means unknown. Small hands, large hands, hands with too many fingers or too few. And at the very back of the cave, where light from their equipment couldn't quite reach, a message scratched into the wall in French: "We are still here. We are always here. The sand remembers. The reef is hungry. Do not trust the survivors." The archaeologists photographed everything, catalogued it all, then sealed the cave. Official reports mentioned impressive survival skills and tragic loss. Nothing about the wrongness. Nothing about the way equipment malfunctioned in specific patterns. Nothing about the 3 team members who had to be evacuated for psychiatric evaluation after they started speaking in that ancient language during their sleep. Nothing about the baby blanket they found, woven from seabird feathers that, under microscopic examination, contained fibers that shouldn't exist. Organic material that wasn't plant or animal, but something else. Something that had DNA sequences that matched no known organism on Earth. Today, Tromelin Island sits in the middle of the Indian Ocean, a square kilometer of sand and scrub that looks innocent in satellite photographs. A historical site, a place of tragedy and triumph, a story of survival. But if you visit, and very few people do, you'll notice things. The way the wind stops when you speak. The way your footprints fill in behind you, no matter how dry the sand. The way the reef hums at a frequency that makes your teeth ache and your thoughts slow down, become sluggish, become not quite your own. And at night, if you're foolish enough to stay, you'll hear the singing. The same song the reef sang on July 31st, 1761, when it called a ship into its jaws. The same song the survivors heard every night for 15 years. The same song that some people, descended from 7 women who should have died but didn't, still hear in their dreams. The island is waiting. It's always waiting, because the sand remembers everything. The reef keeps everything. And what survives on that tiny piece of hell isn't survival at all. It's transformation. It's becoming. It's the price of breathing air that was never meant for human lungs. Drinking water that flows from veins in the earth that pulse with something other than geology. Eating food that whispers to you as you chew. Sleeping on sand that shifts beneath you like a tongue tasting your dreams. 7 women and 1 baby left Tromelin Island in 1776. But what arrived at the Isle of France? What integrated into society? What walks among us still, wearing human faces like masks, carrying the island's patience in their bones, waiting for the reef to call them home? History says they survived. History celebrates their resilience. History is very good at lying. The truth is written in sand, sung by water, remembered by an island that isn't an island at all, but something older, something patient, something eternally, terribly hungry. And if you listen closely on certain nights when the wind is right, you can hear them calling. Not for rescue, not for help, but for company. The reef is lonely. The sand is vast. There's always room for more, always.